Hello and welcome to all of you. My name is Jennifer Overbo, and I'm the
MBTI Product Marketing Manager for the Myers-Briggs Assessment Suite here at CPP. For those of you who may be new to us, CPP is the exclusive publisher of the Myers-Briggs Assessment, as well as other instruments such as the 5OB, which are used by organizations around the globe to improve their performance. We are so pleased to have you join us for today's webinar, Be Better at Coaching Transformational Leaders with the Myers-Briggs tool. Before we get started, I'd like to provide all of you with some information about our format today. Our presentation will run for about 45 minutes, after which point we will open up for questions from our audience. If you have a question that you'd like for us to address, please submit it through the questions box located on the right side of your screen. If we're not able to get to your question during the presentation, we will follow up with you directly to make sure you get the information you requested. As a reminder to all of you, we will be sending the slide presentation following the webinar, so you can know that you can receive those slides and review what we spoke about today. We will also be sending a copy of the recording to you, which you may also locate on our website at cpp.com. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Stanley Truskie. Dr. Truskie is an international executive coach and professor of organizational leadership at Nova Southeastern University. He's also the founder, president, and CEO of MSD Leadership Consultants, which specializes in advising firms in the areas of board governance, organizational effectiveness, executive development, and performance improvement. Dr. Truskie has over 25 years of experience in consulting with many organizations in areas including assessment, training and development, strategic planning, and organizational culture alignment. His research and professional client list includes organizations such as SmithKline Beecham, Pitney Bowes, Gillette, Lockheed Martin, H.J. Heinz, BNY Mellon, and U.S. Steel. He's written extensively in management, and his writings have appeared in books, professional journals, and business publications, including Business Week. Dr. Truskie's current book, Leadership and High-Performance Organizational Cultures, describes how leaders shape organizational culture to achieve successful performance and growth, and cites leading companies that are using this approach and getting positive results. We are delighted to have Dr. Truskie here with us today to share his insights for how to coach leaders and enable organizational change, growth, and high performance. Dr. Truskie, welcome. I'd like to turn the presentation over to you.
Kara, thank you. Thank you and welcome everybody. Let me just first of all say thank you to the CPP team, Kara, Leah, and Jennifer for helping me put this presentation together. They did an outstanding job in putting together what could be presented in 2 weeks into a 45-minute session. I want to thank them for all the help they've provided in doing that. To be a better coach at coaching transformational leaders with the MBTI tool is what this is all about. And so let me get started. And this is about me, and you've heard about me. Just sort of a quick review based on what I've been doing over the past 25, 30 years. Kara has mentioned much of my experience has been in the field of executive coaching, organizational development, specifically geared toward helping leaders reshape their organizational cultures. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. Let me go to the next one. This is my book, Leadership and High-Performance Organizational Cultures, second edition. The first one came out in 1998. I did a second edition in paper, 2002. This is the latest edition. And I show this because it includes some later information, and it gave me an opportunity to take the model that I developed, to use it in corporations and companies, and to see if it worked, and actually did work. So the model I'm going to talk about today, relative to helping leaders transform organizational cultures, works, and I've got evidence of that, and I have a lot of executives in my book who verify that. The content of the webinar is drawn from my book, 95% of it. And I just want to mention that because there are over 150 references that I use in my book. I won't be showing them on the slides, but I just want to make the caveat that many writers, scholars, and researchers have helped me develop my ideas, my concepts, and my model. The agenda is to talk about organizational culture and how important is it relative to performance, and how to go about building a high-performance organizational culture using the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs coaching tool, along with the model that I'm going to talk about, the L4 strategy / organizational model. And I'm going to give you some examples of how you can use the MBTI tool along with the model in coaching leaders to become transformative in reshaping the organizational cultures. And we're going to talk about how you can begin to transform your organizational culture, or if you're coaching leaders, how you can help those leaders transform their organizational cultures. We'll also talk about some resources for you at the end, and as Kara said, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. How important is organizational culture and performance? Well, it's very important. Lou Gerstner made a statement that really defines how important culture is related to performance when he made this statement. Culture isn't part of the game, it is the game. And he said this in reference to the turnaround he did with IBM in the 90s when IBM was on the brink of bankruptcy, and Lou Gerstner was responsible for helping turn it around. And essentially what he did was he focused on the culture in turning the company around and improving its performance. And basically what he did was he verified what prominent theorists and scholars have been saying over the last 30 to 35 years, and that is organizational culture and performance are closely linked. And some of my favorite theorists and scholars in the area of organizational culture are listed there. I'm sure you have your favorites, and many others are listed in my book. Key points I'd like to make about organizational culture. There are many different versions of it, many different definitions, but I just want to make some key points here. For example, you probably all know that organizational culture consists of norms, values, beliefs, and assumptions that are shared by members within the organization, but not necessarily written, but organizational members come to learn these values, beliefs, and assumptions, and it really drives the behavior of these members. We also know that it directly impacts the performance of the organization. Unfortunately, among leaders, it's often overlooked and underestimated. I find that leaders instead focus on new products, new technology, market share, and bottom line. What I tell leaders is this: you either take charge of shaping a culture or you will get what evolves on its own. In other words, if you don't nourish your garden, you will get many weeds that will eventually take it over. And then I often hear from leaders and managers, from higher-ups, board of directors, or shareholders, stakeholders, you need to transform this organization. And to that, they say, yes, transform it, but transform it to what? And that is always a big question facing leaders and managers, and the challenge they face in terms of what kind of culture should I shape for my particular organization. And to answer that, let me share with you a question that I pose to companies that I'm approaching when I'm going to do a consulting assignment relative to reshaping that company's organizational culture. And basically, it's a very simple question, and there's two sides of it. I meet with them in groups, and I like to meet with the leadership group first, the leadership team first, and then meet with various worker member groups throughout the organization. And I ask this question: tell me about your job at your company. I want to hear the positives and the negatives. And so as I'm listening to folks speak up and tell about the positives, I get things like this: well, I have a very interesting, challenging job. Or people are very friendly and helpful around here. Another one is we have supportive management. They're really there to help us out, do our jobs. Another one is I have clear responsibilities and expectations. I know what my job is. I know what's expected of me. And another one is I feel like I'm valued around here. I'm appreciated around here. So those are some of the positives I usually get. And what I do when I'm working with groups is, many of you probably do, we get the white paper and we list them, and then we paste them around the room for everybody to see. And then the next question is this. Well, now you told me about the positives. Let's hear about the negatives, about your job and your company. And some of the negatives I get are these. You know, there's a lack of trust in top management. You got to watch what you say around here. It's a very highly competitive atmosphere. People don't help one another. There's stifled individual growth. There's no real room for opportunity to grow and develop. The quantity of work is valued over the quality of work. Another one is popularity plays in promotion. In other words, it's who you know in terms of who gets promoted around the organization. And so when I look at the results, what I like to do is compare. I like to compare the positives versus negatives. For example, if I see more positives than negatives, that tells me something about the organization. Or vice versa, if I see more negatives than positives, that tells me something about the culture of the organization. And then I like to make comparisons. Leaders versus members of the organization, one department versus another, office staff versus factory workers, and corporate versus field offices to get an idea of what the overall culture looks like and what the subcultures look like. And basically, what these are elements. And Edgar Schein defined elements as characteristics that distinguish and identify an organization's culture or its subculture. And they're broken into two parts. One is positive elements. Positive elements, for example, be a team player, treat others with respect. We perform quality work around here. We care for one another. These positive elements enhance organizational effectiveness and eventually, ultimately, improve organizational performance. On the other hand, negative elements like never disagree with the boss, succeed at any cost, never share job knowledge, it's job security, always CYA if you want to survive around here. These are negative elements, and they tend to diminish the organization's effectiveness and ultimately its performance. So, in building a high-performance organizational culture, the goal is this, to identify and integrate positive elements into the organization's culture. And if you think about it, it just makes sense. What you want to do is populate the culture of the organization with positives. When you do that, you begin to diminish the influence of the negative ones. And so it's a pretty easy concept to grasp. But the next question is, well, where do I find these positive elements? Well, based on my research of the literature over the past 25 to 30 years, I've discovered that there are 4 cultural patterns around which these positive elements cluster. One is cooperation, the second is inspiration, the third is achievement, and the fourth I call consistent. Now let me go over each one individually and briefly. Cooperation, think about family. And when you think about family, obviously there's some negatives of family, but I want you to think about the positive elements of family. For example, caring, sharing, helping one another, making personal sacrifice, doing what's in the best interest of the family, teamwork, collaboration. Those are the positive elements associated with cooperation. The second one, inspiration. I want you to think about religious organizations, churches, that says that we're here to serve a higher purpose, not just to make a profit or to come up with new products or services, but we need to be concerned about people as individuals. We need to help them grow and develop. And those positive elements within a culture relate to providing training and development, opportunities for growth, employee engagement, all those things that treat individuals with respect, dignity, and helping them to aspire what they want to become. The third is achievement. When you think about that, think about scientific organizations, college, universities, research organizations, and the positive elements there are being the best you can be, being at the leading edge of discovery, the search for excellence, high standards, being the best that the organization can possibly be. Those are the positive elements of achievement. The last one is consistent, and I want you to think about military police organizations that says that we need to have some discipline in what it is we do. And what that relates to an organizational culture is that you need to have some rules, some regulations to make sure that you're consistent with your quality, with your customer service. It's not once a week or twice a month. It's constantly. It's every day, every time. And in order to be consistent, you need to have some rules and regulation in order to ensure that consistency. So the question I have to pose to you is, which cultural pattern do you think is the most important? I know you're all waving your hands out there. You know the answer. I know you know the answer, especially if you read my book. They're all equally important. And that is what we call the optimally balanced culture. For example, the cooperation cultural pattern, it encourages people to work together to help one another achieve common goals. The inspiration cultural pattern inspires people due to their strong beliefs in the organization's values of serving social needs and helping people grow and develop. In the lower right-hand corner, we have the achievement cultural pattern, motivates people to perform at high levels and work toward being the best and achieving excellence. And in the upper right-hand corner, we have the consistent cultural pattern, which establishes rules and systems to help people achieve consistent results efficiently and effectively. And so that you see on this vertical horizontal axis at the northern end, we see an organization that's concerned about the here and now, but at the southern end, it's also concerned about the future and vision. On the east side of it, you see the concern for the personal, and on the west side, you see it wants to be logical relative to what it does and how it conducts its business. And in the middle, what you see is the L for organization. I'll tell you what that stands for. L stands for leadership. 4 stands for the power by which you raise your organization's effectiveness and ultimately its performance. So the L4 organization is an optimally balanced culture that's integrating all of the positive elements of the 4 cultural patterns together. Who are some companies that have these high-performance cultures? Well, they're listed here. There's 5 of them, and it's interesting because they're all 5 different industries. Southwest Airlines, you know what that is. Nucor Corporation, in case you don't know, is the steel industry. It's been a high performer for a long period of time. Levi Strauss Apparel, BMW Automobile, and IBM Technology. And what they have in common, these 5 companies, even though they're from different industries, is that they've been high performers for a long period of time. They're not overnight wonders, but they've had this consistent, sustained high performance for years, not just months. And what they also have in common is that in studying these organizations, they attempt to achieve this optimally balanced culture. And what they'll tell you, the leaders of these organizations will tell you, it's a journey, it's not a destination, and so you have to constantly monitor the culture to make sure that it's not becoming unbalanced, because when it becomes unbalanced, then it becomes an underperforming organization. I'll talk more about that later. But the next question we have is, how do we coach leaders to shape this optimally balanced organizational culture? Well, just as elements define culture, as I mentioned before, personal preferences help define a leader's thinking, deciding, and acting out. And I have found the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, to be very helpful in coaching leaders and executives, because in leading, styles are based on personal preferences. And each preference, as you know, has strengths and it has blind spots. And the key is to maximize those strengths and reveal the blind spots to the leader that we're coaching. Because, as you know, if you've used the Myers-Briggs before, that overstated strengths can obscure what I call full spectrum leadership. And what I mean by that is that a leader needs to become aware of all the positive elements of all of the preferences in all 4 of the cultural patterns. And I get this full spectrum leadership. I can't take credit for it, but I learned about this term from Lockheed Martin, where I am an approved executive coach, and they have what they call a full spectrum leadership program that's very similar to the concept that I'm talking here, but they don't use the Myers-Briggs, or not my model, but they do have positive elements that closely resemble the elements that I'm presenting here. And here's the MBTI. I know most of you out there are experts in the MBTI. There are 4 dichotomous dimensions: introversion versus extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, judging versus perceiving. We know these 4 dichotomous dimensions yield 16 different types. But for our discussion, I want to focus on the two middle paired dimensions, sensing and intuition, and thinking and feeling, because those two dimensions really indicate a leader's preference relative to a cultural pattern that they will favor. These two dimensions are also very important because they measure perception and judgment, which are key in a leadership position. If you look at the bottom, you notice Tichy and Bennis came out with a book. I don't know if you've read it or not, but these are two experts in the field. I consider them leadership experts. And what they say in their book is judgment is the essence of effective leadership. And I found that to be absolutely true. Now, these four paired middle dimensions are listed here, and I'll go over them briefly because they're each important. For example, SF, sensing feeling, this person tends to be briefly sympathetic and friendly. Now, those are positive qualities that we want to see in leaders, because I always tell leaders leadership is about building relationships. So having those qualities of being sympathetic and friendly are very important. Sensing and thinking, the ST person brings practical and matter-of-fact qualities to leadership position, and those are very important because people like straightforward leaders. They like people that are down to earth, practical, and sort of tell it like it is. And F, intuition, feeling, enthusiastic and insightful are extremely beneficial qualities that we want leaders to have, because that inspires people, and it also helps people look into the future in terms of where the organization is going. And the last one, NT, intuition, thinking, is logical and ingenious, and certainly we want that in a leader because we want our leaders to be smart. We want them to be creative in terms of how they look at complex problems that we need to resolve. So all four of those middle paired dimensions offers very positive qualities that we look for in leaders. Now, when we go back to my model, I'm going to match up these middle paired dimensions with the corresponding cultural pattern that preference favors. For example, if you look in the upper left-hand corner here, SFs favor the cooperation cultural pattern, and so what they really focus on is making sure that these elements are embedded, integrated within their cultural pattern. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, you see the NFs. They favor the inspiration cultural pattern, and they tend to focus on the positive elements of this particular cultural pattern. In the right-hand corner, you see the NTs. They favor the achievement, and so they tend to focus on those elements related to the achievement cultural pattern. And up in the right-hand corner, you see the STs. They tend to favor the consistent cultural pattern, and they tend to focus on integrating the positive elements of that organizational culture. Now, here's a very important point. There's a risk of leaders' preference relative to each of the four cultural patterns, because when an overly favored leader's cultural preference, with that, there are risks of shaping an unbalanced culture. Because we know this from our research and from looking at organizations, that an overemphasis on cooperation, and as I said, SF leaders tend to favor the cooperation cultural pattern. If they are really high-scoring SFs, they run the risk of running an organization that's characterized as managed by committee, directionless, and unaccountable. NFs, they favor the inspiration cultural pattern, and if they're high-scoring NFs, they face the risk of creating an organization that's flubby, soft performance, and undisciplined. And the NTs favor the achievement cultural pattern, and they run the risk of creating an organization that's cold, indifferent, blindly ambitious. And the STs, they favor the consistent cultural pattern, and they run the risk of creating an organization that's top-down management, controlling, autocratic, political, and I can hear a lot of you people out there saying, boy, do I know a lot of organizations like this. CPP has done a great job in illustrating this. That really brings home the point of what I'm talking about here. For example, the SF, sensing, feeling, favor the cooperation cultural pattern. And as I said before, they run the risk of creating an organization that's managed by committee, directionless, and unaccountable. They tend to favor the positive elements to the point that it can be extreme in creating this kind of organization. And notice what's missing from this view. There are no cultural patterns or elements from the other three, and that's what I mean by being blinded when there is an overemphasis or a high-scoring SF who highly favors the cooperation cultural pattern. They're not using or integrating the positive elements from the other cultural patterns into their repertoire of leadership behaviors and skills. Next, we have consistent on the right-hand corner. The STs, they favor the consistent cultural pattern. They're at risk for creating an organization that's controlling, autocratic, and political. And again, if you look at what is missing from this graphic, you see that the positive elements from the other three cultural patterns are not there because the high-scoring ST so much favors the consistent cultural pattern that they tend to overlook the positive elements from the other cultural patterns. And you can see the same for the inspiration, lower left-hand corner. NFs tend to favor the inspiration cultural pattern and run the risk of creating an organization that's clubby, soft performance, and undisciplined. Again, what's missing here within that person's repertoire, leadership repertoire, are elements from these other cultural patterns. Then the last one is achievement. These are the NT. A high-scoring NT will favor the achievement cultural pattern and is at risk for creating a cold, indifferent, and blindly ambitious organization. And again, you see that the positive elements from the other three cultural patterns are not a part of this leader's repertoire. So, what is the ideal MBTI profile? Anybody have an answer to that question out there? I think I have an answer here. There it is. There isn't one. There's no perfect ideal personality in leadership, and there certainly is no ideal MBTI profile. As leader coaches, we cannot change someone's MBTI preference, just as we can't change their personality. So as leadership coaches, it's our duty, our responsibility to help these leaders become adaptive. And it's through the self-awareness where they understand the risk of having a high preference in one area that they may be creating an unbalanced organizational culture. So in coaching leaders, again, it's a matter of self-awareness and helping leaders adapt so they can reshape the organizational culture to make sure that it has the optimal balance. And it's well said here in the statement at the bottom, leaders need to transform themselves if they're going to have any hope of transforming the performance of their organizations. Lois Harper made that statement, and I believe in it 100%, because in order to transform the culture of an organization, leaders must transform themselves first. I'm going to give you two case studies. One has to do with coaching a leader in a division and changing the culture there, and the other has to do with working with a leadership team in a nonprofit and changing the culture there. Let me start with Pete first. Pete is an ESTJ. He's a young manager, 32 years old, manager of a coke plant in a steelmaking facility, 500 plus employees. And I don't know if you know anything about coke plants. They're very dirty, very dusty, very unsafe. Just not a really nice place to work. And in this particular coke plant, there was low morale, low productivity, a lot of accidents, a lot of grievances, OSHA citations when Pete took over as manager. Unfortunately, after 1 year in the job, Pete didn't make things better. He actually made them worse. Morale got worse, productivity got worse, there was an increase in grievances, OSHA citations, so Pete was demoted and replaced by another manager. A friend of mine, Tom, became the director. He was a former coaching client. He took over the division 14 months after Pete was demoted. And under his direction, he had this coach plan. And as soon as he took it over, Pete's replacement quits. And he goes to the HR person and says, well, do we have any viable candidates to take over for this person that just quit? And the HR person said, the only person that has the qualifications, experience to do this is Pete, and he was already demoted. And Tom said to the HR director, listen, let's give Pete one more shot, and I'll do it on one condition. Number one, he agrees to do this. And number two, we can get Truskie in here to coach Pete. And so Pete agreed to the coaching process. So I met with Pete, described the coaching process, and began my engagement. I conducted an assessment and revealed to Pete high-scoring ST, high-scoring J, really likes control. He tends to create this unbalanced, consistent cultural pattern. Notice ST, consistent. They tend to favor that particular organizational cultural pattern. And he agreed to a coaching plan after I made this revelation to him, and I worked with him for 12 months. And what did I do? Well, what I worked on was the SF elements, making sure that he understood teamwork, collaboration, working together, forming teams within the various departments, helping them form teams, forming teams himself, being a part of teams, making sure he was recognizing people for their contribution in terms of cleaning the place up, in terms of making contributions on a team, setting standards for each team. He was helpful in getting them to set their own standards, and he set standards not only for the teams but also for the organization. So what happened as a result of this? After 10 months, the place was cleaned up. Employees were became proud of their work areas, and morale increased dramatically. And as a result of Pete being open to this coaching process and being aware of his limitations relative to his high-scoring ST, integrated all of these positive elements for these other three cultural patterns into his leadership repertoire in terms of his leadership behavior and his practices. And what ended up happening was the Coke plant won awards that showcased for other plants around the world, and Pete was promoted to area director responsible for 3 operations and over 1,200 employees. Here's another situation. This is has to do with an INFP middle-aged president of a tri-state blood bank, 600-plus employees. As I found out after I started working at the organization, it was an unbalanced inspiration culture. So you could probably imagine what this organization was like. The board member called me up because I coached leaders within his company, and he describes the blood bank to me as having poor direction, no goals, no objectives, no performance management systems, and it was sort of like directionless. High turnover, lawsuits, EEO charges, employee complaints, and Dave, who is our INFP, is a very visionary guy. I mean, he had a lot of positive qualities. However, he found it very hard to manage an organization. So what I did was I worked individually with Dave as a leadership team. I did the assessment and the coaching. I give feedback to the individuals and the team as a whole. And what I presented to them was that, folks, we have 3 SFs and we have 2 NFs. And Dave, who is the leader of the group, is a high-scoring NF, so he sort of trumps the other folks on the leadership team, and he was really emphasizing the inspiration culture. So what did I do? Well, I worked with each member of the leadership team individually, working on their behaviors relative to the full spectrum notion of becoming aware of positive elements from the other cultural patterns and helping them develop a team strategy of actions. For example, a mission that was virtually non-existent. There was no vision, there were no goals, no objectives, and that's what we worked on, and that's what we accomplished. And Dave, in working with him and coaching him, got him to understand the positive elements of ST, control and discipline, the positive elements of team, not only working with his own team, but creating teams throughout the organization, and the NT in terms of improvement and high standards that were non-existent within the organization. It had virtually no standards. So we implemented the plan through employee meetings, communication outlets, supervised training, and team building. And after 15 months, the director reported back to me and said that there's been a dramatic turnaround. And again, it's because Dave was open to this coaching process, and his team bought into it also, and it was me working individually with the team, but also collectively with the team to help turn this organization around. So what's the coaching strategy? Basically, it's this. What you need to do is identify the leader's cultural preference using the MBTI. And you need to help identify what some of those blind spots are. What are some of those positive elements that are missing from this person's leadership profile? And identify the missing elements within those related patterns. And then what you need to do is suggest behaviors that that person needs to adopt and integrate them. And that's what your coaching is all about. That's where you spend your time and effort in coaching that individual. Here's an example. Here's a leader whose cultural preference was cooperation and SF, and this person had blind spot of the positive elements of consistent, ST. In other words, this person lacked some elements of discipline. And so what you want to do is, first of all, create that awareness to the leader, and then work with that leader in terms of developing some behaviors for the leader, with the leader, to integrate standards, accountability, and responsibility, which many times are missing from an SF leader. So how do you begin to transform your culture? I love this quote here by Edgar Sheen. He says, building an organization's culture and shaping its evolution is a unique and essential function of leadership. So how do we transform the culture, or I should say, how do we help leaders transform the culture? Two parts to this, folks. One is the behavioral side. In other words, once we create this awareness and get leaders to identify their blind spots and the positive elements missing from their leadership profile and repertoire, then we need to help them to adapt and integrate these behaviors into their leadership profile. There's another part of it too, because you cannot, and this is very important, you cannot just change the culture of an organization by changing the behavior of the leadership. The second part of it is the action part. And the action part includes integrating and incorporating things like organizational processes, mechanisms, implementing policies, reward systems, having an employee selection process in place, making sure you're getting the right people who reflect the kinds of values we're looking for in this optimally balanced culture, adopting organizational statements like these are our values. So it's a two-part process. And one of the weaknesses I find in people who tend to want to coach leaders is that they're lacking in having a lot in the area of knowledge relative to organizational behavior and organizational development, because understand that you need to not only coach the leader relative to behaviors, but you also need to recommend some actions that the leader needs to consider in helping to change the culture. So, coaching transformational leaders with the MBTI tool. Here's the approach that I use. It's worked for me, and I'll share it with you. First of all, I'd like to discuss the coaching approach, steps, timelines, expectations, and I always like to discuss confidentiality issues because leaders are always concerned about who's going to find out about the feedback that you're going to give to me. And obviously, I'm like a priest. I don't share that with anybody. Conduct an assessment, the MBTI, and the other assessment tools that you may want to use. For example, the FIRO-B is an excellent tool that you may want to consider using, and also a 360. I use this 360 also to get information from subordinates, peers, and superiors. Then what you want to do is share, explain, and discuss the cultural model that I've described to you, because what I found is that when leaders get feedback, they like to compare it against a model that's valid, practical, useful, and shows evidence that it works. So I do spend time before I give the feedback to make sure that the leader understands not only the theory behind the MBTI and the purpose of it, but also how it relates to the cultural model that I just presented. Because once they see that, and they see that it's followed by other successful organizations, then you tend to get their attention, their cooperation, and their commitment to the coaching process. Then, obviously, you give them feedback, and then give them some time to study, meditate, reflect on it, and then you collaborate, and you put together a personal development plan in terms of the behaviors and the actions that you're going to work on with the leader for the next 6 to 10 to 12 months, and then you coach according to those goals, objectives, and action plans outlined in the plan. I'm not a free-spirited leadership coach. I'm pretty straightforward. Leaders appreciate that. I tell them my approach, tell them the process, and then once we decide on that, we go, and then we work on doing the development plan, and then I work with them over 8, 10, 12-month period. Now, here are some resources, tools that perhaps you'll be interested in pursuing. Let me talk about my book first, Leadership and High-Performance Organizational Culture. Make sure you get the second edition, because the first edition goes back to 1998, and really it's dated and doesn't have the updated approaches we've used with the companies since that time. And the best place you can purchase that is atlasbooks.com. That's the quickest way to get it. I'm going to turn it over to Karen now to talk about the next 3 instruments.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer, and I wanted to answer some of the questions that are coming up and let you all know that typically when you're in a situation where you're coaching leaders for transformational change, there are many different tools that you can decide to use that are part of the MBTI product suite. We recommend the MBTI Step 2 Interpretive Report. That is the Form Q of the instrument. It provides you not only with 4-letter type, but additional information on over 20 facets that will give you a better understanding of how individuals vary within a type. We also recommend, as a companion to that, a new guide that we have out, which is the Step 2 User's Guide, which is just aimed at helping you make the most of your Step 2 or Form Q interpretations, as well as the leadership report using the 5ROB and the MBTI instrument. Stan has mentioned many different instruments that he uses. 5ROB assessment is one of those that can provide you with a really good understanding of how MBTI type and your wants and needs can be expressed and help you to better understand someone's behavior. To that end, we do have a follow-up webinar that we're calling a Putting It into Action series that we'll be holding on March 10th. And Sherry Haney, a CPT Organizational Development Consultant here, will discuss the 10 tips for putting these coaching concepts into action using the resources, including the MBTI Step 2 assessment and the 5ROB tool. Stan will also be hosting a workshop and would like to talk with you a little bit about that event.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yes, I've had some interest indicated by people who learned about this webinar, have contacted me and said that they would like to attend a one-day workshop to more fully investigate this whole notion of using the leadership model that I described and the whole business of how do you go about coaching leaders and executives to be transformative in reshaping their culture. And rather than arbitrarily just offer a workshop somewhere at some location that's inconvenient, an inconvenient place at an inconvenient time, I just thought what I'd like to do is find out how many folks out there are really interested in attending this kind of one-day workshop. It won't cost you an arm and a leg. I'll just give you, it'll probably be like a $250 kind of deal where you'll get a copy of my book and other materials. Don't hold me $250, put around there, $250, $300. But if you are interested in that, email me. Let me know, and let me know where you're from, where you'd like to see it offered, and even a date, and we'll try to put something together if there is enough interest indicated out there.
Great. Thank you, Stan. Dr. Truskie, we've had many questions coming in during the presentation, so I'd like to go ahead and start with the Q&A portion. Feel free to continue sending us questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can.
Okay, let me throw out something I'm always asked, whether it's in an organization, in a classroom, or with a group of executives, how long does it take to reshape, change a culture? And I'm sure you've read in literature more than once that it takes, 6 to 7 years to change the culture of an organization. That is not necessarily true. It really depends on a couple things. Number one, it obviously depends upon the size of the organization. The smaller, the easier it is to change. The larger, the more difficult it is. And the second part of that is how long has that culture, that particular culture, been in place? I mean, has it been in place for the last 75 years? And is it a top-down managed culture that really focuses on the ST? Then if that's the case, it's going to take probably 5 to 7 years to change. So it really varies.
Thank you, Stan. If you could move the slide just one skip forward, I'm going to go ahead and ask you a very common question that we're getting, which is, can you talk to us a little bit about the 360 tool that you use as part of your engagement?
Yes, there's a 360 tool that I've developed along with my colleagues that measures a leader relative to a number of areas. It looks at qualities that particular person has. It looks at skills that particular person has. It measures a number of areas. One important area that it measures are the behaviors associated with each of the 4 cultural patterns, so that we can learn from especially subordinates, not only just peers, but subordinates, how balanced or unbalanced is this leader relative to those 4 cultural patterns and the elements within them.
Great. Thank you, Stan. We have many folks who'd like to see your email address as well. So if you could advance the slides so that we can show them how to contact you.
There it is.
We've had many questions about going into consulting engagements where you have to deal with leaders who maybe are not willing to change or are having difficulty understanding how to translate knowledge of themselves into affecting organizational change. Can you talk a little bit about how you help bring leaders along in those instances?
That's a tough one. I'm not going to say that it's easy, because I run in organizations where, and there's a large corporation that I've walked into and walked into the HR department, and the vice president of human resources of that large organization says, "Do not mention the C word around here." And I said, "Huh? What's that?" "Do not mention culture around here, because all of our top managers and executives think that that's a soft word, and that's just a waste of time, and it's a lot of gobbledygook and a lot of psychobabble, and so they're not, don't even mention that word." So to that person I said, "Thank you very much, see you later," and walked out. Point being that the leader has to be somewhat open to this process of self-awareness, because as I mentioned in the slide earlier, if they're not open to self-awareness, if they're not willing to transform themselves first, then you're really wasting your time. And I can tell you this, I've wasted a lot of my professional time going in at the behest of the HR person and working with lower level managers on this concept and coaching them. And they'll come back to me and say, "Hey, this is all great, but you're working with the wrong people. You need to be working with the top leaders of the organization." And they're right. So if you're going to transform an organizational culture, obviously you want to start at the top. Now, it's a little bit different if you're talking about a division or a small plant like the one that I pointed out, where you can go in and talk to the manager of that particular subculture, and if they're open to it, then obviously you've got a pretty good shot at of getting that person to go through the transformational process first, and then helping them to transform the culture of the organization.
Thank you, Sam. We have also received a bunch of questions around your coaching style in particular. So can you talk a little bit about when you have a contract to coach an executive, how often do you meet with them? What are the length of those meetings? Can you just give us some tips for how you structure that consulting time?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. Obviously, it's a lot more intense up front than it is in the middle and on the rear end side, because I need to really develop a rapport with the person, and so I spend a lot of time with them discussing the L4 organizational model. I talk a lot about the whole business of assessment, the assessments I use, the purpose of them, the theory behind them. I talk a lot about the things I'm going to offer to that person moving forward. But me and that person need to put together this development plan, because my approach, my philosophy is, if you don't have a development plan, then what are you coaching on? So I spend a lot of time putting together that development plan, and I don't do it by myself. I do it as a partner with the person I'm coaching. I learned very early in my career. Executives would tell me, well, go away and analyze this stuff and come back and tell me what I should do. And I'd go out and do that and come back and say, okay, here's my recommendations of what you ought to do. Well, guess what? That person ended up doing none of it because they had no ownership of it. So I learned at a very early stage in my career that I need to sit down with that leader, and we need to develop that plan together. They need to have ownership of it if they're ever going to really buy into it and follow the goals and objectives of that plan. Oh, and by the way, we meet anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 months, and it really depends upon the a number of factors. How available is the executive or leader? I mean, can I meet with that person, or is it limited to the really busy people? How far away are they? And it doesn't always have to be face to face. Many times we get on the phone, we email, we fax. There's a variety of ways of communicating. But I think it's important that you understand this. If you're going to be a leadership coach, you need to have some good face-to-face upfront time with that leader in order to establish the rapport you need in order to help that person go through a change process.
Thank you, Dr. Truskie. Another question that we're getting quite often, so I'm going to pose this to you, is that when you're entering an organization and they're not familiar with the Myers-Briggs assessment, and you would like to use that as part of your coaching toolkit, how do you begin to explain to the organization and to those about the Myers-Briggs assessment, about type concepts, and introduce it such that you can begin working with both individuals and groups within the organization?
Well, I think my presentation is a good example of what I do. I mean, I just don't go in and say, well, we're going to do some assessment with the Myers-Briggs. And everybody says, oh, the Myers-Briggs, oh, yeah, I heard all about that, done that, been there. I'm an INFJ, or, and I'll hear a lot of that. And I'll say, no. Let's not even talk about the MBTI right now. And what I do is I work them into understanding the importance of the MBTI relative to leadership. Because, as I said, many of the people I work with, they've already taken the MBTI. They already know what their letters are. So, and I'll say, okay, just put that aside for a minute, and then I take them through this presentation that I just have shown to everybody, so that they understand the model that I'm talking about, the cultural model that I'm talking about, the importance of making sure that it's optimally balanced, the positive elements of all four cultural patterns, and then you work into showing the relationship of that to the MBTI. Too many times I find people just walk in an organization and say, I'd like to describe the MBTI to you because it's one of the assessment tools. Leaders aren't really interested in hearing that. They're more interested in you telling them how you're going to help them become transformative and reshaping the culture. So that's the lead discussion that you have. And then you work into the various assessment tools that you need in order to get the person to gain the self-awareness and ultimately the skills and the actions they need in order to transform the culture.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Truskie. Earlier you spoke of 4 elements that distinguish and identify an organization's culture. And we've had some questions about how were those elements derived. Were they derived conceptually or statistically?
You mean the 4 cultural patterns?
Yes.
Yeah. The 4 cultural patterns, those were derived from my research of the literature over the last 25 to 30 years. And what I have found in the literature is that there are basic elements that contribute to organizational effectiveness and eventually to organizational performance. And as I looked at them, I saw that they clustered around 4, and some writers have identified 4 of these cultural patterns, a little different than mine, but I just sort of did a massive research to find out the commonalities that come together relative to these 4 cultural patterns, and that's what I came up with.
Dr. Truskie,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, we've had many questions, and I don't know if you would like to share this with the group, but many folks have asked what your Myers-Briggs type is, and they've also asked how that impacts your work as a coach.
Well, what do you think it is? Anyone want to take a guess? I am an ENFP. And so if you know anything about ENFPs, we certainly like to work with individuals to kind of energize them, to help them become better, whatever it is they do, to look at the future, to improve relative to their own personal goals and also their leadership goals. So my profile fits to a T what I do for a living, because I really enjoy it, because obviously my type kind of lends in that direction. And if I were in a leadership position, I would be very much concerned about making sure that I don't create the organization that is lacking elements of discipline, of teamwork, and of achievement, and setting high standards and high goals. Because I tend to want to help people, and sometimes I overlook the need to set high standards. I'm just more interested in making sure they're getting what it is they need to move on with their personal lives or their leadership position. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And we've had also many questions about if you could just share some of your particular questions or approaches to helping individuals who, once they know their 4-letter type, are looking for ways to flex and try ways to flex their type, or as you put it, develop their blind spots. Can you speak a little bit more to how you enable them to work on and see, number one, what they could be doing differently, how they could be maybe capitalizing or leveraging the other elements of their style?
Yeah, I'll use an NF. Obviously they are, if it's a high-scoring NF, then they're going to really favor the inspiration culture, and that's good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but if they favor it to the point for really high NF, then they're going to favor it to the point of becoming unbalanced. And the thing that I find that high NFs tend to overlook, they overlook the positive elements of achievement, but they also overlook the positive elements of the consistent cultural pattern. And so what I do is we just have a basic discussion about that, and what I'll do is I'll just ask some questions about, well, let's look at some of these positive elements in the ST cultural pattern and tell me, relative to your leadership approach and style, how do you model these behaviors in terms of making sure that there are some rules, regulations, and discipline within your organization, holding people accountable, setting goals. Tell me some things that you do relative to the positive elements in this culture, and that creates a great discussion, and it also creates some areas that we need to work on, because many times I'll find out that this particular NF leader does not set goals and objectives for their people. They're very loose on rules and regulations and some standard operating procedures that we need in order to make sure that we are disciplined. And then we talk about, okay, fine, you admit that some of these elements are missing. Let's talk about some behaviors that you can incorporate that will help make this happen. And I'll say, managing by objectives, what do you know about that? I've heard about it. Okay, fine. Let's talk about it, and let's talk about some of the behaviors you can integrate into your leadership repertoire in order to create some of these objectives within your organization.
Dr. Truskie, thank you so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed the presentation.
So
For those of you who submitted questions that we did not answer, we will be following up with you individually to provide you with information. And I just quickly want to remind everyone that the slide presentation is forthcoming. You can also locate a recording on our website tomorrow on cpp.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great day.